Now that Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is out on Netflix, I finally got to watch it since it didn't come to any theaters remotely near me. This was one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and it did not disappoint. For the most part. But let me start with what I loved. This film, as you can obviously tell from the trailers, is possibly one of the most visually stunning movies you'll ever see, and certainly the most gorgeous cinematic experience of the year. Why Netflix decided not to give everybody the chance to see it in theaters, I will never guess. There have been many adaptations of this classic piece of horror literature over the years, from the incredibly faithful to the downright bizarre. But if anyone can make a version that cuts through to make its own massive impression while still honoring the source material, it's Guillermo del Toro. Besides the lavish production and storytelling artistry in the film as a whole, I find this take on the creature itself to be both incredibly unique and familiar in the best way possible, from the outstanding makeup design and performance to the particularly tragic way the script and directing choose to depict him. In so many ways, this is the adaptation fans of the book have been waiting for decades. Unfortunately, this movie is not perfect. To get some nitpicks out of the way before I get to my real frustrations, there were some points where the CGI was very noticeable, most noticeably with the animals. Not that the animation was that bad, it's just that they behaved far more like cartoon animals than real ones, which made the fact that they weren't real all the more noticeable. Also, I'd have to read the book again to remember if the creature had Mr. Incredible's levels of strength and Wolverine-level healing abilities, but even if he doesn't in the source material, I could tolerate him having such superpowers in the movie if there was any attempt to explain them. All the movie had to say was that Victor had to pump the body full of some kind of serum in order to reanimate it, and doing so gave it superhuman abilities. But no, the monster is just magically unkillable for no apparent reason. Still, I would consider the film a masterpiece if those were my only issues. Sadly, there are a couple of problems in the script that are much more important to my enjoyment of the overall story. One is just the pacing. I've seen people complain that the story slows down when it switches to the creature's POV, but that wasn't my issue at all. My problem was that Guillermo del Toro decided to condense or entirely skip over much of the latter half of the book, presumably to save time he could instead spend depicting Victor's childhood early in the film. I know he wanted to do this to focus on the whole father-son side of the story and explore generational trauma, but I felt it was a bit unnecessary and made the film take a little too long to get going while rushing towards the ending in the last 30 minutes. Besides, I missed getting to see the monster slowly haunting Victor from the shadows and tearing his life apart. That was a large chunk of the book, and it's basically absent from the film, with several major events combined into one scene. If that sounds like it removes much of the horror part of the story, you'd be right. In fact, Guillermo removing the horror aspects of the book will be a recurring theme in this video. However, the pacing is not the issue I'm going to spend most of the video discussing, partly because it's the lesser issue, and partly because it's not the one I intend to fix today. So what is the greatest source of my frustration with Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein? Well, we're about to get into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film and don't want to know how it differs from the book, perhaps you should go check it out first. Otherwise, you've been warned. My biggest issue with the film is that what I'd consider its two most pivotal character moments both feel incredibly sudden and unearned. The first of these is the moment where Victor decides to destroy his work, including the creature itself. And the second is the ending, where the creature forgives Victor. Let me start with the latter because I don't have nearly as much to say about it, then I'll spend the rest of the video on the former. This moment comes in the last few minutes of the film, and there is absolutely nothing setting it up. At this point, the creature has been trying to kill his maker for months or maybe even years, and he's even killed several members of this ship's crew to get to him. They've expressed nothing but hatred for one another, basically since the creature was locked beneath the castle, but while Victor is lying helpless on his deathbed, he gives a rather pathetic apology, and that's apparently all it takes for the creature to break down and forgive him for everything he's ever done to him. And it's supposed to feel like a big emotional moment, even though it comes out of nowhere and feels totally out of character for everyone involved. Unfortunately, I don't have a simple quick fix for this moment, so I'll just leave it at that and move on to the other, which I do intend to fix. First, let me briefly explain what happens in the book. Originally, Dr. Frankenstein's mad obsession gives way to revulsion pretty much as soon as he sees the creature. He instantly recognizes his creation as an offense against nature, against the laws of life and death, as something that simply shouldn't exist. He is struck by the disturbing, inhuman nature of its existence and resolves not to let it loose on the world. He fails, of course, but it's a dramatic moment for his character. For me, the horror Victor feels as he realizes what he's done in abusing sacred powers beyond his control defines the novel's tone and themes. This moment encapsulates the story. But as I said before, Guillermo strangely removes the most horrifying elements of the story, and this moment is no exception. In the film, Frankenstein's motivations for abandoning his life's work and attempting to kill his creation are much less clear, since he has never indicated any sense of horror towards the creature up to this point, much less towards his own actions. And thus his decision feels far more abrupt and far less emotionally effective. However, there do appear to be two main reasons for his actions presented in the film. The first of these seems to be simple perfectionism for his creation, who doesn't immediately demonstrate the level of intelligence he apparently hoped for. Now, I get that Guillermo wanted Victor's relationship with the creature to mirror his relationship with his own abusive father, and that does explain his cruel treatment of it. But I just don't buy that it would lead him to flush all his ambitions and hard work down the toilet. He just achieved the greatest scientific breakthrough in the history of humankind. And if conquering death, crafting and animating a sentient life form with his own hands wasn't astounding enough, the thing is a literal superhero. I don't care how much of an obsessed perfectionist or terrible father Victor's supposed to be, I can't imagine him ever destroying this thing for such petty reasons as frustration with its linguistic capabilities. Just imagine if all you ever wanted was to be a parent. You spend years looking for a partner who wanted to start a family. You worked your rear end off to afford to buy a house and raise a child, and you even struggled with infertility for years before miraculously conceiving. I don't care how much of a cold perfectionist you are, there's no way you'd just decide it was all a waste of time and burn your own house down with your baby inside because it wasn't speaking in full sentences after 2 months. Fortunately for the film, while this is a seemingly major part of why he gave up on his quest after completing it, it's not the straw that broke the camel's back. Unfortunately, the other reason is perhaps even more petty and stupid. If you can believe it, it's that Victor is jealous of the monster, because his brother's fiancée Elizabeth, who he covets, seems to show it more affection than him, and because her name is the second word the creature learns. I suppose that could be seen as an extension of his god complex, with him becoming wrathful when his creation stops seeming to worship him, but in practice, it just feels petty and lacks any of the emotional and thematic weight of the book. So yeah, in my opinion, Victor's dramatic turn is far less compelling in the film than in the novel, turning him from an obsessed man of scientific ambition, horrified at the result of his efforts to play God, into a petty, jealous perfectionist willing to burn down everything he's ever built if it doesn't quite live up to his impossible expectations. If that's what Del Toro was going for, I guess it worked, but I don't find it nearly as interesting as what we find in the source material. Now, I'm not just here to criticize, I intend to fix this issue and give this moment in the movie more weight. But to do so, I'm going to need to bring up another issue I neglected to mention earlier, the death of Christoph Waltz's original character, Heinrich Harlander. In the film, Harlander is the man funding Frankenstein's work, one of the few who sees his vision and is awed by it rather than horrified. On the night of the fateful storm, he reveals why. He is in fact terminally ill and hopes Victor can build him a new body. When Victor refuses on the grounds that no part of his diseased body is savable, Harlander tries to sabotage Victor's experiment but dies in the process. This whole moment was strange because it didn't appear to serve much thematic purpose in the overall story, and didn't have any emotional weight or impact on Victor's character development, being immediately overshadowed by the creature's awakening, and then swept under the rug until Victor needs to make up a story to scare his brother William into getting Elizabeth away from the creature thanks to his previously mentioned jealousy. However, his death could have been critical to the story, had it played out a bit differently. First of all, I would have had it take place later, after the creature has been brought to life. Harlander doesn't drop his terminal prognosis out of nowhere either. He helps Victor bring the creature to life, and shares in his wonder and excitement. However, while Victor sees it as a child and treats it as a father would his son, Harlander, sees it as a mere creation of science and urges him to present it to his former colleagues in the scientific community immediately so that he can gain the support to continue his research. Victor insists upon taking the time to raise the creature and educate it within the castle, perhaps fearing how it will be treated or what it might do if presented to the world too soon, causing Harlander to grow impatient. He urges Victor to consider all that his work could accomplish, curing diseases and injury, making indestructible soldiers, creating a superior race of perfect, immortal beings. However, these visions only trouble the Doctor rather than inspire him, as he grows increasingly afraid of what will happen when he reveals his success to the world. Finally, in a tense confrontation, Harlander reveals the reason for his urgency. He is dying and wishes for a new body. The Doctor initially argues, as in the film, that no part of him can be saved, but when pressed on whether there's any chance of success, he admits the real reason for his reluctance. The idea of combining human and monster disturbs him. It wouldn't have before, but since giving life to this creature and becoming increasingly convinced that it is something less than human, he finds himself horrified at the thought of turning a living person into such an abomination as the one he's created. When he finally outright refuses to help his partner, Harlander threatens to destroy the monster and all of Victor's work. This leads to a violent confrontation between the two men, ending when the monster steps in to defend his creator, brutally and effortlessly killing Harlander, though it doesn't seem to understand what it's done. From this moment on, Victor is visibly terrified of his creation. Here, this is obviously the reason he changed the creature in the basement and initially tries to keep its existence secret from William and Elizabeth when they visit. While there's still perhaps some jealousy of Elizabeth's affection for the creature, there's also genuine fear for her safety, not just feigned concern used to scare her away. And here, his frustration with its learning progress is clearly not just impatience and perfectionism. After all, if it can communicate, it can prove it's more than a dumb monster that could turn violent at any moment. If it can talk, it can be reasoned with. But as long as it seems incapable of articulating or understanding speech, it's as dangerous as a wild animal. But ultimately, it's not a hatred or even fear of the creature itself that leads him to destroy it, but rather Harlander's disturbing vision of a world full of inhuman creations capable of such terrifying destruction, which he becomes desperate not to allow to become reality. And ironically, it is this desperation that causes the horrifying destruction that follows. This imaginary version of the story provides Frankenstein with a motivation for his shift that is somewhere between the novel and Del Toro's film. It reintroduces the horror and profound change of heart from the book, as Frankenstein realizes he's created an abomination against nature that he cannot control, while retaining the film's more gradual decline in the quality of the father-son relationship between the Doctor and his creation, starting with a fatherly pride and affection, and slowly devolving into fear and revulsion. I believe it's the best of both worlds. But what do you think? Which version is best? Mine, Del Toro's, or Mary Shelley's? Or is there another you love better? How well do you think this new adaptation of the classic Gothic horror treated its source material? And how does it compare to previous adaptations? I can't wait to hear your thoughts, so please join in the discussion in the comments. And until next time, never stay silent.